In a quiet neighborhood in Del City, Oklahoma, a man walked into a backyard late one evening expecting to meet a teenage girl he had been speaking with online. Instead, he walked straight into a trap.
Father creating an elaborate sting to catch an alleged predator targeting his daughter. Police say the suspect contacting the girl online, then going to her home. The family ready and waiting.
Within seconds of stepping onto the property, the 33-year-old man was tackled to the ground by members of the girl's family who had been waiting for him. It was not the meeting he had planned. And for the father of the 15-year-old girl involved, that moment was the end of a plan that had taken shape only hours earlier.
He had planned everything with her, and he was ready, and we were too.
The situation began when the father discovered that an adult man had been communicating with his teenage daughter online. The messages had been sent through social media and messaging platforms, and the conversations had quickly raised serious concerns. The father had learned about the communication through a phone monitoring application that allowed him to keep track of activity on his daughter's device. Once he saw the messages, he immediately contacted police. However, officers reportedly told him that there was little they could do at that point unless the man actually showed up or committed a crime in person. That response left the family in a difficult position. So the father decided to take matters into his own hands. Rather than cutting off communication immediately, the family continued the conversation with the man, making it appear as though the meeting he had planned was still going to happen. The messages continued, and eventually the man confirmed that he intended to come to the house that night.
The father took it upon himself to contact this individual, ask her, and say, "Are you still coming tonight?" And he said he was.
What he didn't know was that the person responding to him was no longer the teenager he believed he was speaking to. It was the girl's stepmother. Meanwhile, the rest of the family began preparing for his arrival. They waited inside the home and near the backyard entrance, watching and listening for any sign that he had arrived. Then, late that evening, the man walked through the gate and stepped into the yard. Within moments, the family confronted him.
So we set up by the back door. The moment he entered my yard, at that point in time, I had to do what was right for as a father.
The video recorded during the confrontation shows the man being tackled and restrained on the ground, while the family held him there until police arrived. According to the father, the decision to act was simple. Once the man entered the property, he felt it was his responsibility to protect his child and prevent the situation from going any further. When officers arrived at the scene, the man reportedly told them that he had only intended to come over and talk. Investigators, however, arrested him on a charge of unlawful communication using technology. Despite the unusual circumstances, police made it clear that the family themselves would not face charges. While authorities generally warn against taking justice into your own hands, officers also acknowledge that parents have a strong instinct to protect their children when they believe they are in danger. The case quickly sparked debate online, with many people praising the father for taking action, while others questioned whether situations like this should be handled solely by law enforcement. Because while this particular situation ended with an arrest, confrontations like these can easily become dangerous if emotions escalate. Still, for the family involved, the situation had one clear outcome. A man who believed he was meeting a teenage girl walked into a backyard expecting one thing, and instead found an entire family waiting for him. Now, while that story involved a carefully planned confrontation, the next piece of footage captured something very different. A moment recorded by a home security camera that left viewers trying to explain what they were actually seeing. Quick interruption. If you're enjoying this video, why not hit that subscribe button? We're on a mission to hit 500,000 subscribers, and when we do, 3 lucky fans will win a limited edition CreepyVids hoodie or shirt. Right now, 61.4% of you watching haven't subscribed yet. It's completely free, and your support helps us make even more awesome videos. So, don't miss out. Subscribe now, and let's get back to the video. The video was recently posted online by a girl named Erica on her social media account, where it quickly began spreading across the internet and eventually gathered more than 14 million views in a very short period of time. According to Erica, the footage was recorded by a security camera inside their home and shows her younger brother sitting calmly with their grandmother inside her bedroom, appearing completely relaxed and unaware that anything unusual is about to happen. Then something extremely disturbing occurs. Suddenly, the boy's leg appears to be pulled sharply backward, as if something unseen inside the room had grabbed him and forcefully yanked him away. The unexpected movement immediately terrifies the child, who quickly jumps up and runs out of the room in panic. After reviewing the footage, Erica explained that she now more than ever believes that their home may be haunted, saying that several strange and unsettling events have recently begun happening around the house. So, what do you think actually happened here? One thing is for sure, moments like that can easily turn into internet mysteries. But the next case is not speculation or strange shadows on camera. It is a real incident recorded by surveillance footage that forced people to question the official version of events. The footage begins during the quiet hours before sunrise on December 13, 2022, inside a modest trailer in Cherokee County, North Carolina, where a series of events captured on camera would later raise serious questions about official accounts and become a widely discussed example of how surveillance footage can reveal the difference between what authorities claim happened and what actually took place. The chain of events begins with a phone call from a neighbor named Emily Floyd, who contacts emergency services after hearing loud noises coming from the nearby home of Jason Clower and his wife, Allie. During the call, she reports sounds she describes as fireworks, along with what she believes is intense arguing, and she tells dispatchers that she suspects the noises may actually be gunshots. She goes even further by suggesting that Jason might be threatening his wife, and warning that the situation could potentially involve a hostage scenario, although none of these claims are confirmed at the time. Deputies from the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office respond to the area, but are unable to make direct contact with anyone inside the home. Instead of slowing the situation down to verify what was actually happening, investigators begin moving toward a much more aggressive response. At approximately 2:15 in the morning, Lieutenant Milton Teasdale obtains a search warrant that relies heavily on the neighbor's unverified report, stating that Jason may be armed and that a dangerous situation could be unfolding inside the trailer. Although there is no formal mutual aid agreement in place, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indian Police Department's SWAT team is contacted to assist with the operation, and by the early morning hours, the quiet residential area surrounding the trailer has been filled with heavily armed officers preparing for what they believe could be a high-risk encounter. As part of the operation, officers deploy a robotic surveillance device equipped with a camera and microphone, which is thrown into the home in order to gather information about what might be happening inside. What the officers do not realize at that moment is that Jason and Allie are asleep and completely unaware that their home has become the center of a large tactical response. At approximately 4:54 a.m., officers begin using a loudspeaker to order Jason to come outside with his hands raised and clearly visible. What happens next is captured in detail by Jason's own interior surveillance camera, which records the moment he opens the door and steps out onto the porch. The footage shows Jason appearing to comply with the commands being shouted at him. His hands are raised above his head, one of them holding a cigarette, while the other holds the small police robot that had just been thrown into his living space moments earlier. Standing directly behind him in the doorway is his wife, Allie, who is also raising her hands in an obvious attempt to show that she is unarmed and following instructions. There are no sudden movements, no aggressive gestures, and no visible signs of resistance from either of them. Nevertheless, within seconds of Jason stepping onto the porch, Officers open fire. Jason is struck multiple times in the chest and arm, collapsing almost immediately as he shouts that he has been shot. Behind him, Allie screams in shock and confusion, demanding to know why officers fired. The camera captures panic and fear as Jason repeatedly tells officers that he does not have a weapon while lying injured on the ground. As this unfolds, officers rush past him and enter the trailer with weapons drawn, shouting commands while clearing the interior of the home. For several critical moments, the footage shows that Jason's injuries are not the primary focus while officers secure the house. Eventually, he is transported to a hospital where he survives his injuries. In the hours that follow, however, the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office releases a public statement claiming that Jason confronted officers and was armed during the encounter, a version of events that quickly spreads through local reports. Jason is subsequently charged with communicating threats and resisting officers, even though the surveillance footage appears to show him complying with police commands. Months later, when the video from inside the home becomes public, the official narrative begins to collapse. The footage clearly contradicts the claim that Jason was armed or acting aggressively, and as public scrutiny grows, prosecutors quietly drop all charges against him in March of 2023. Soon afterward, Jason files a federal civil rights lawsuit accusing the officers involved of excessive force, unlawful entry, false arrest, and deliberately misrepresenting what happened during the raid. In a sworn affidavit submitted during the case, District Attorney Ashley Welch states that investigators misled both her office and the magistrate judge, who approved the warrant by portraying the situation as a hostage crisis and claiming that Jason was armed, even though no evidence supported those claims. Despite those findings, a special prosecutor later decides not to pursue criminal charges against any of the officers involved. Public reaction to the case is intense, with many people questioning how someone who appeared to follow police commands could be shot and still see no one held accountable. Jason's attorneys later revealed that body camera footage from officers at the scene shows him lying on the ground bleeding and staring at the sky, believing he might not survive the encounter. In February of 2024, Jason Clower reached a settlement totaling $10 million, with the payment shared between Cherokee County and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, and funded through insurance coverage. Even with the settlement, no agency formally admits wrongdoing, and no officers are disciplined or removed from their positions. Additional sworn testimony submitted in March of 2025 again confirms that Jason never posed a threat, and that key details were misrepresented during the investigation in order to justify the raid. A broader civil trial scheduled for August 2025 may reveal further details about how the operation unfolded and whether deeper institutional failures played a role. The case remains deeply unsettling, not because the camera failed to capture what happened, but because it recorded the moment so clearly. A man stepping outside his home with his hands raised, appearing to follow instructions, and still being met with gunfire. The footage did not change the events of that morning, but it removed any doubt about what the camera had seen. And in situations like this, the most powerful witness is often not a person at all, but a silent camera that records the truth exactly as it happens. Cases like this often leave people asking difficult questions about accountability and how quickly situations can escalate. But sometimes danger appears in a completely different setting, in places people visit every day without thinking twice. Amber Sullivan was 26 years old, a pediatric nurse at a children's hospital, and someone known among her friends for maintaining a strict routine that almost always included late-night workouts after long hospital shifts. On Thursday, October 12th, she finished an extended shift she had agreed to cover for a colleague before heading to the Planet Fitness on Riverside Boulevard later than usual, a small change in schedule that would later become one of the most haunting details in the investigation. At 9:07 that evening, Security cameras captured Amber walking across the parking lot wearing a gray athletic jacket with a gym bag over her shoulder, moving casually toward the entrance of the gym with no visible sign that anything unusual was about to happen. Inside the bag were ordinary things: scrubs for her next shift, a water bottle, her phone charger, and a protein shake she never had the chance to drink. Earlier that night, she had texted her roommate, Kelly Brennan, letting her know she expected to be home around 10 and asking if Kelly needed anything from the store on the way back. A message that would later replay endlessly in Kelly's mind as investigators tried to reconstruct Amber's final hours. Inside the gym, Amber worked out quietly with earbuds in, moving between the treadmill and the weight machines while other members came and went around her. Several people later told police they remembered seeing her that night, although no one recalled speaking with her directly. At 9:04 p.m., her membership card recorded her exit, and surveillance cameras showed her walking toward her Honda Civic, where she placed her gym bag on the passenger seat before pausing briefly to check something on her phone. Instead of getting into the car, however, Amber turned and began walking toward the rear of the parking lot in the direction of a narrow alley that ran behind the strip mall. Her movements did not appear rushed or frightened, and there was no sign that she was being followed or forced in any way. At 9:08 p.m., she simply moved out of camera view, disappearing into an area that unfortunately had no functioning surveillance cameras. By 10:45 that night, Kelly Brennan had begun to worry after several calls to Amber went straight to voicemail, which was completely unlike her. At 11:15, Kelly drove to the gym herself and found Amber's car still parked exactly where the cameras had shown it earlier in the evening. The vehicle was locked, and Amber's gym bag remained visible on the passenger seat, creating the first unsettling sign that something had gone wrong. Police arrived at 11:32 p.m. and began searching the area around the vehicle. There were no obvious signs of a struggle near the car, and Amber's keys and wallet were still inside the bag. Her phone, however, was missing. An officer searching the alley soon discovered Amber's gray jacket lying near a dumpster with the shoulder torn, and investigators also located fragments of a shattered phone screen caught inside a nearby drainage grate. Despite these discoveries, there was still no sign of Amber herself. Detective Lisa Yamamoto took over the case early the next morning, and almost immediately, investigators began to suspect an abduction. The lack of cameras in the alley created a major obstacle, but forensic teams documented several clues, including unusual tire marks that did not match delivery vehicles that normally use the area, a partial boot print in loose gravel, and several small drops of blood that testing later confirmed belonged to Amber. By Friday morning, Amber's photograph was being broadcast across local news stations, while her parents rushed in from Cincinnati and publicly pleaded for information that might lead to her safe return. Tips began pouring in from across the city. One person reported seeing a dark cargo van in the alley that evening, while another recalled hearing what sounded like a scream, but assuming it was simply an argument. Then, a gas station manager provided a detail that quickly drew investigators' attention. Earlier that evening, a man had purchased zip ties and duct tape while paying cash before leaving in a dark blue cargo van. Security footage from the store captured him briefly, and in one frame, investigators were able to read part of the vehicle's license plate. The van was registered to Isaiah Kamani, a 34-year-old maintenance technician with no criminal record, a wife, and a young daughter, whose life on paper appeared completely ordinary. When detectives visited his home on Saturday morning, Kamani cooperated with them and explained that the supplies were related to his maintenance work. He even agreed to let officers search his van, where they found tools, paperwork, and a tarp that contained bloodstains that Kamani said came from a minor injury he had recently suffered. Tests later confirmed the blood was indeed his. For a moment, the case appeared to stall, but the breakthrough came when digital forensic analysts examined Kamani's phone and discovered location data placing him at the Planet Fitness parking lot at 9:05 on Thursday night, only meters away from Amber's last known location. Shortly afterward, his phone traveled back toward his home, but investigators also uncovered internet searches that painted a far darker picture. Kamani had searched for ways to disable surveillance cameras, how long it takes before a missing person is reported, and rural locations near Columbus. He had also searched Amber Sullivan's name and viewed her social media accounts days before she vanished. When detectives confronted him with this information, Kamani requested a lawyer, and the investigation immediately shifted from questioning him to urgently locating Amber. Investigators began mapping rural properties Kamani had access to through his maintenance work, eventually focusing on several abandoned structures outside the city. Late Saturday night, a K-9 unit searched a vacant farmhouse in Madison County, where the dogs alerted near a detached barn shortly before 1 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, October 15th. Inside the building, officers found Amber alive, but barely conscious. She had been restrained, severely dehydrated, and suffering from exposure, conditions that doctors later said would likely have become fatal within another day if she had not been found. Amber spent several days in the hospital recovering from her injuries and months working through the psychological trauma of the experience. When she was eventually able to speak with investigators, she explained that she had heard a metallic sound near the dumpsters and believed someone nearby might need help, only to be attacked from behind, restrained, and forced into a van before waking up alone in a cold, unfamiliar building with no idea where she was or whether anyone would come. Isaiah Kamani was later charged with kidnapping, aggravated assault, and attempted murder. Prosecutors argued that the crime had been carefully planned, pointing to his internet searches, the supplies he purchased, and the digital evidence placing him at the scene. The defense attempted to explain his actions by referencing untreated trauma from his past, but the jury ultimately found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to decades in prison. Amber eventually returned to work part-time at the hospital and later began advocating for improved lighting and surveillance in public parking areas across Ohio. Although she rarely speaks publicly about what happened, she once explained that during the hours she believed she might not survive, she focused on the children at the hospital who needed her, a thought she credits with giving her the strength to keep going until help arrived. Now, while that case involved a carefully planned crime that investigators eventually uncovered, the next story comes from a homeowner who installed a camera for a completely different reason. A man named Lukey says that whenever he returns home from work, he frequently notices that objects around his house appear to have been moved or knocked onto the floor, something that initially seemed easy to explain because he owns a cat that often wanders around the house while he is away. However, after this started happening repeatedly, Lukey began to suspect that something else might be causing it, so he eventually decided to install a security camera inside the room in order to see exactly what was going on while he was gone. What the camera recorded that evening left him deeply unsettled. The footage shows a lamp beginning to flicker on and off without anyone touching it, and moments later, a doll placed nearby appears to shift and move on its own. At the same time, the cat can be seen staring intently into the corner of the room, as if it is focused on something that isn't visible in the footage. After watching the recording, Lukey realized that his cat had never actually been responsible for the strange activity the way he originally believed. and he now says he is convinced that something unexplained may be happening inside his home. What do you think could explain what the camera captured? One thing is for sure, sometimes surveillance cameras capture strange moments that are difficult to explain. Other times, however, they capture something far more troubling: the last confirmed movements of someone who will soon vanish. Pay attention to the young woman walking calmly down a narrow hallway inside a Yale University research building as she swipes her identification card and heads toward the basement laboratories, where she spends most of her time conducting experiments. Her name is Annie Le, a 24-year-old Yale graduate student studying pharmacology, who is known among her professors for her meticulous attention to detail, and among her friends for her warmth, kindness, and determination to succeed. On the morning of September 8, 2009, Annie has no reason to believe that the ordinary routine captured by the building's security cameras will become the final images of her life. At that moment, her future seems carefully planned and full of promise, because only days later, she is scheduled to marry her fiancé, Jonathan Wadowski, and both families are preparing to travel for a wedding celebration that has already been planned in detail. That morning begins like countless others as Annie leaves her off-campus apartment and heads to the secure research facility where she works. The building is designed with strict access controls, where every door requires an identification card and every entry is automatically logged in the security system. Cameras capture Annie entering the building and riding the elevator down to the basement level, an area filled with laboratories, research rooms, and mechanical spaces connected by narrow corridors. Security footage clearly records her arrival, but no camera ever records her leaving. As the day continues and Annie fails to return home that evening, concern slowly begins to build among the people who know her best. She misses scheduled appointments, and when her fiancé repeatedly calls her phone, there is no answer. Messages remain unread, something completely out of character for someone who is normally so responsible and organized. By nightfall, Yale officials are notified, and Annie's friends file a missing person report with the New Haven Police Department, raising a troubling question that quickly becomes central to the investigation. How can someone disappear from inside a locked research building? Investigators begin by reviewing hours of surveillance footage and electronic access records, which reveal that Annie entered the building that morning and traveled to the basement level where she worked. After that moment, she is never seen again. Her identification records confirm the same pattern. She badged into the building, but never badged out. If Annie never left, then whatever happened to her must have happened somewhere inside those walls. Police secure the building and conduct an extensive search of laboratories, storage areas, offices, and mechanical rooms, checking spaces above ceiling panels, beneath desks, and inside large refrigeration units used for research storage. Despite the thorough search, they initially find nothing. Specially trained dogs are brought in to assist, although the chemical smells common in laboratory environments make tracking extremely difficult. Even so, when the dogs are guided toward certain basement utility areas, they begin to show signs of interest, suggesting investigators may be close to discovering what happened. At the same time, detectives analyze the building's access logs to determine who else was present in the basement around the same time Annie arrived. One name appears repeatedly: Raymond Clark III, a 24-year-old animal laboratory technician who works daily inside the building and possesses detailed knowledge of maintenance spaces that most students and researchers rarely notice. When questioned by investigators, Clark insists that the day was completely normal and that he saw nothing unusual. His answers are brief and carefully controlled, leaving detectives with few immediate clues. Outside the campus, the case rapidly attracts national attention as news spreads that a Yale graduate student only days away from her wedding has vanished without explanation. Search efforts expand beyond campus, but the most important evidence continues pointing back toward the research building itself. 5 days pass, and the calendar reaches September 13th, 2009, the day Annie was supposed to be married. Instead of attending a wedding, investigators returned to the building for another detailed search, this time focusing on infrastructure spaces that may have been overlooked during earlier sweeps. Behind a bolted panel in a basement room, they discover a vertical cable chase, a narrow shaft designed for electrical wiring and ventilation that is not intended for routine access. When investigators open the panel and examine the confined space inside, the missing person investigation instantly transforms into a homicide case. Inside the shaft, they find Annie Lou. Forensic evidence reveals that Annie fought back and that she was strangled on the same day she disappeared before her body was hidden almost immediately afterward. The location of the hiding place suggests the person responsible was familiar with the building's layout because the cable chase is difficult to access and almost impossible to notice without knowing exactly where to look. Attention quickly returns to Raymond Clark. His electronic badge records place him in the same basement areas as Annie that morning, and search warrants allow investigators to collect his clothing and examine his workspaces. The forensic results are decisive. Annie's DNA is found on Clark's clothing, while Clark's DNA is discovered near the hidden space where her body was concealed. Investigators also document scratch marks on his body consistent with someone defending themselves during a struggle. Unable to explain the evidence, Clark is arrested and charged with Annie Lou's murder, sending shockwaves through the Yale community because the suspect is not an outsider, but someone who had quietly worked inside the building every day. Facing overwhelming evidence, Clark later agrees to a plea deal in which he pleads guilty to the crime. In 2011, he was sentenced to 44 years in prison. For Annie's family, however, the legal resolution cannot replace what they lost. They had traveled to Yale expecting to attend a wedding celebration, but instead, they gathered for a memorial service honoring a young woman remembered for her intelligence, compassion, and dedication to advancing medical science. In response to the tragedy, Yale strengthened security procedures across its facilities. Yet Annie's story remains a powerful reminder that even in places designed to be secure and carefully monitored, danger can still exist in ways that no one expects. Annie walked into her workplace that morning with plans for her future and a wedding only days away. She never walked out. Now that was all for today, folks. If you enjoyed these horrifying clips, click to see more on the video on screen.